the reason Paddy the Baddie gets as big as he is because it's like you get this mental disorder. I strict as fuck for about 10 weeks before that fight.
I think I've got a bit of an eating disorder because of MMA.
But I developed an eating disorder over the years where it was either 100% dieting and cutting weight, being disciplined, or 100% being an a-hole.
This is gonna sound maybe stupid to some people, but like I had to relearn to like how to eat, you know what I mean? And you know, it's called an eating disorder for a reason. There's disordered thoughts behind that, and like I got to the point where I was convinced that like I didn't need to eat.
Depending on the sport, there can be a huge emphasis on body weight, body fat, and muscle mass. In weight class sports such as boxing, powerlifting, horse riding, and MMA, athlete body composition is arguably as important as their individual performance. Whilst there are legitimate reasons whilst weight classes are implemented, this can lead athletes to engage in suboptimal or somewhat dangerous nutrition practices. Depending on the nature of these practices, athletes can be at risk of developing disorders around their eating habits. Some of the biggest stars in MMA have been quite outspoken about their experiences with eating, which begs the question, is this a wider issue that lurks beneath the surface of MMA? So what do the athletes have to say? Well, first up, Sugar Sean O'Malley recently appeared on the JRE and discussed this very topic.
The reason Paddy the Baddie gets as big as he is because it's like you get this mental disorder. I strict as fuck for about 10 weeks before that fight. Like I'd have a little cheat meal on a Saturday, but the closer we got to the fight, 4 or 5 weeks out, I was just eating so clean to where right after, it's like I'll order 2 cheeseburgers, some appetizers, and just eat until I'm so uncomfortable.
So posted today.
Yeah, Paddy's, and I'm not, who am I to fucking say, but I know that's just not good for you. How much he gets up to 200 pounds. That's like me getting up to like 190. Or 185.
Yeah, that's a lot, dude.
It's sad. It's like, that's not good. But it is. It gives you this mental disorder from eating.
In this podcast, they refer to a very famous study back in 1945. The Minnesota Starvation study investigated the effects of prolonged restrictive eating on physiology and psychology of 36 male participants. Participants spent 3 months eating a normal diet, approximately 3,200 calories a day, followed by 6 months of 1,600 calories spread between 2 meals per day. This was classified as semi-starvation. Following the semi-starvation period, participants had a controlled rehab phase of between 2,000 and 3,200 calories per day. Then finally an 8-week unrestricted period where there was no cap on caloric intake. In terms of the psychological impact of the semi-starvation phase of this experiment, this made the participants obsessive about food. Apart from the obvious reduction in weight, unsurprisingly, participants showed signs of depression, irritability, amongst various other symptoms associated with significant dieting. During the unrestricted rehab phase, participants regularly ate between 7,000 and 10,000 calories daily. They also displayed behaviours such as eating multiple meals in one sitting, eating so much they would be sick, and losing sense of hunger signals. Even after this study had reached its completion, these symptoms such as binge eating and purge cycles, as well as concerns around their body image, lasted for months. These binge purge cycles appear to be quite common in MMA. Paddy the Baddie is known for his extreme eating outside of camp. It's almost become a bit of a meme in the MMA community. A month or so ago, he appeared on Steve-O's podcast and discussed his eating habits.
I think I've got a bit of an eating disorder because of MMA. Really,
Why? Because of the weight
cuts, lad, the weight cuts, dieting and that. I really genuinely think I've got a bit of an eating disorder because at times like this now, I just will see it later because we're going to watch the UFC later tonight.
Yeah.
If there's food in there, you'll be like, is he still eating? You know what I mean? People like when they go and eat with me, they're like visibly shocked at how much I can eat. Everyone says, oh, he's fat, because I do. I go up to like 200 pounds. Like last time I start 7 weeks out, so 7 weeks out, the Monday 7 weeks out, I was 88.8 kilo last time. Basically 89, that's like, what, 196, 197, something along them lines. And I was like 5 weeks later, 6 weeks later, I was like 78 point something. You know what I mean? I'd lost like 10 kilo in like 5 weeks.
Certainly from looking at this video and what Paddy discussed, it certainly seems like he has these prolonged binge purge cycles, which you'd often see in cases of bulimia. Paul Felder was also quite outspoken about his experiences with dieting.
And like I said on some of these other interviews, one of the things I wish I had done, and my God, you've seen it in full effect when I'm not on the discipline side of things, right? I used to get really big, used to have a really poor diet because I would cut so much weight that then when I was able to eat, I would eat everything and want to drink everything. I always trained. That was never the issue. But I developed an eating disorder over the years where it was either 100% dieting and cutting weight, being disciplined, or 100% being an a-hole. And I wish that I
would you go as that far to say it was actually a disorder that you had in your life?
100%. Bro, I would sit weeks after the fight and I would buy like 3 candy bars in the middle of the day and just eat 3 candy bars and then eat a pint of ice cream and drink, a few beers. I couldn't have it for months and months and months. So then when I got it, I wanted to have it all. So I wish I would have learned how to live a life of moderation all year, so that even in camp, if I wanted to have 1 cocktail at the end of a hard day or 1 beer, no big deal, because I'm never binging it all. So I would say to the young fighters out there, learn to find an athletic lifestyle and live a balance. And there's a lot of guys that do. I just wasn't one of them, and I know a lot of my friends and teammates and stuff out there.
Restrictive dieting increases the likelihood of binge eating episodes. Paul's advice was to find more balance and moderation, and he believes it would have had a significant impact on his overall performance throughout his career. This certainly makes sense, not only from a psychological aspect, but also a physiological aspect as well. If you have a more moderate approach to eating outside of camp, you can probably walk around a bit closer to your natural fight weight. This means you don't necessarily have to be as restrictive in camp. You'd be able to eat more calories and therefore have more energy available to train. At a basic level, the more energy you have to train, you can train more for longer and have more of a performance focus rather than a dieting and depletion focus. Plus, if you're in a significant calorie deficit, as would be the case if you're having to severely restrict food intake, you are at greater risk of injury. Hansen was recently interviewed as well, and she discussed her experience in this topic.
This is gonna sound maybe stupid to some people, but like I had to relearn to how to eat, you know what I mean? And it's called an eating disorder for a reason. There's disordered thoughts behind that, and like I got to the point where I was convinced that like I didn't need to eat, and eating would make me blow up and be big, and I'd miss weight, and like and I never had a problem making weight, so I don't know why that was a fear in my head, but it was just a lot mentally to try to rewire, you know what I mean? I'm an athlete. I need fuel for my body, and I never looked at it that way. So I literally had to like reverse diet. I had to take off a month and a half of 0 physical activity, which was really hard for me because I've been, super active since I was 18, and I went pro. I've been nonstop. So just mentally and physically, like having to take a step back like that, it was really hard. You know what I mean? My body literally like relearning how to digest food, and I'm trying to fix all my my hormones back to normal, you know what I mean? And my blood work, everything that was showing there, I had to like take supplements, and like I'm still like improving everything. Everything's not perfect, but right now I'm in the best shape of my life for sure, and I'm actually fueling my body and learning to be okay with that.
Kay details a couple of really interesting things here, one of which is the lack of healing and increased incidence of illness. Now that is classic underfueling symptoms linked to the female athlete triad. We also had this interview with Paige VanZant back in 2018 done by BBC, where the headline is UFC gave me an eating disorder. I'd suggest this isn't necessarily specifically to do with the UFC, but more to do with the practices she has to engage in as a mixed martial artist. She says here, I was having different issues with myself and my body. I was giving myself an eating disorder to make weight. Her experiences trying to make the 115-pound limit in the UFC strawweight division made Paige realise she needed to change her weight limit for the good of her health. She normally weighs 135 pounds, so that's 20-pound difference, which is pretty significant. I recently went up to the flyweight division, which is 10 pounds heavier, which is a huge difference. For sure, if we think back to what I said previously, if she's not having that prolonged phase where she's really trying to deplete herself, she might be able to have more of a performance focus during her camp, and this might be one of the reasons why she said it made a huge difference to her. It doesn't appear as though Paige goes too in depth in this interview about her experiences with eating, although that is the headline from this article. She mentions here that she saw firsthand the dangers of fighters who drastically cut weight, and she tells a bit of a story about Uriah Hall and the fact that he really did push himself close to the brink of death, as she puts here. He had kidney failure and started seizing in the hallway right in front of her. There are definitely risks involved with doing weight cuts, especially extreme weight cuts. However, I'm not sure whether that process of the fight week is the significant influencing factor of eating disorders. There was also an interview with GSP published in GQ magazine where he discussed his eating habits. I think this article really details the potential severity that MMA can push you towards when it comes to your diet, and this in particular resulted in a clinical issue being developed for GSP. But this potentially isn't an eating disorder that was developed here. An important distinction to make is the difference between an eating disorder and disordered eating. There are some important differences. Eating disorders can be categorized under certain criteria outlined in the DSM-5 or ICD-10. The DSM defines eating disorders as behavioral conditions characterized by severe and persistent disturbance in eating behaviors and associated distressing thoughts and emotions. They can be very serious conditions affecting physical, psychological, and social function. You may well be familiar with some of the names of common eating disorders like bulimia, anorexia, and binge eating disorder. On the other hand, disordered eating refers to food and diet related behaviors that don't meet diagnostic criteria for recognized eating disorders, but may still negatively affect someone's mental, physical, or emotional health. Either way, there can be significant implications for athletes who display eating disorders or signs of disordered eating. Using these criteria, there has been some really interesting research into eating disorders in MMA. A study by Mickelson and colleagues published in 2020 aimed to investigate extreme eating in MMA and BJJ athletes. A total of 111 athletes were recruited for the study, 47 of which were MMA athletes and 64 were BJJ athletes. These guys weren't day one white belts. To be included in this study, they had to have at least 4 years of training, train at least 6 hours per week, or to be a BJJ blue belt and compete in at least 4 tournaments per year. They also eliminated heavyweights from the study, as it was unlikely that they would experience dieting in the same way as the smaller weight classes. Overall, participants' weight ranged between 52 and 93 kilos. Participants completed an eating disorder examination questionnaire, which aims to capture the eating behaviors related to their sport. The results showed that MMA athletes exhibited more extreme weight loss and extreme dieting compared to BJJ athletes. On this questionnaire, total scores of greater than 1.7 have been used to categorize athletes at risk of developing eating disorders for male athletes and greater than 2.3 for female athletes. The results from this study indicate that on average, MMA fighters scored 2.6. To put that in some context, non-athletic males will tend to score around 1.2 on this questionnaire, so there's a pretty significant difference there. The present study does not differentiate results by gender, but you would expect female MMA athletes to score higher. In fact, in a different study published in June earlier this year, they found out of 28 elite athletes who displayed eating disorder symptoms, a female martial artist had the highest score of almost 5.3. That is more than double the diagnostic criteria of someone considered at risk. Unfortunately, this participant was diagnosed with atypical anorexia nervosa and displayed other symptoms indicating an eating disorder. So we know from research that MMA MMA athletes are at high risk of developing eating disorders, and they're also at high risk when compared to other sports. So why does this happen in MMA? Naturally, if you have a significant aspect of your sport that revolves around weight, there will have to be a focus put on food intake. So this isn't just limited to MMA or combat sports. Most sports will have some focus on body weight, but this will vary. There may be less of a focus on body weight in some sports like football or rugby, but for sports like Formula 1, horse racing or cycling, body weight can play a prominent role. For MMA, you not only have the athletic benefits of being leaner, such as displaying an improved power to weight ratio, but it also is necessary in order to compete. Weighing in is mandatory. Due to this implementation of weight categories, fighters often try to use this to their advantage by cutting weight. If an athlete can dehydrate themselves and manipulate their diet during fight week to weigh in and blow back up to a bigger weight to fight, it's logical to assume they would have an advantage over a smaller fighter in the cage. Whilst this practice comes with its own risks, there are simple steps to implement where this can be a controlled, safe, and potentially beneficial process. I believe the association with eating disorders is likely to come from earlier in the weight cutting process. There are three main phases to weight cutting. Number one is the body composition manipulation. This tends to be a prolonged period of time where athletes will try and drop body fat levels and drop their body weight. Number two is the weight cut itself, so this dehydration and food manipulation stage, which usually takes place during the fight week. And number three is the post-weigh-in recovery and replenishment phase. I believe the first phase is where the main risk lies. If athletes give themselves too much weight to lose during their dieting phase, this can be extremely prolonged, extremely restrictive, or both. It certainly wouldn't be out of the question for an MMA fighter to be eating significantly reduced calories for 8 weeks. Let's also take into account the findings from the Minnesota Starvation study. It may not be comparable in terms of length, but fighters will be training more, so I'd still consider an 8-week fight camp to be pretty significant. Restrictive food intake on this scale can lead to binge eating behaviors, which can result in substantial weight gain. As Matt Brown recently said about Paddy Pimblett, most of his training camp is really a fat camp. Matt makes an excellent point here. If you don't have a plan put in place outside of camp, you can easily overeat and get above your fight weight. This can lead to an extremely negative cycle where you have to start fight camp way above your fighting weight. You then have to go through a prolonged and restrictive dieting phase, which subsequently drives a desire to do what you've not been allowed to do, which is eat calorie dense food and lots of it, which then blows you back up way above fight weight. It's a horrific cycle to get into, and you can imagine it's quite a difficult one to break. Unfortunately, this process does seem to be somewhat normalized in MMA. So is there anything that can actually be done about this? The first and most important thing for any MMA athlete is that they work with a suitably qualified nutrition practitioner. So we're talking about a sports dietitian or an SENR qualified nutritionist like myself. Working with a qualified practitioner shouldn't necessarily just be in camp as well, but also outside of camp, where they can help the athlete to develop positive eating habits and start to focus on performance related eating. Unfortunately, there are a lot of nutrition con artists across MMA, and this can potentially exacerbate extreme eating behaviors. It's certainly easier said than done, but adopting a more moderate approach to eating outside of camp and therefore maintaining a body weight closer to fight weight can be of huge benefit, not only for performance but also alleviating some of the psychological strain associated with extreme restrictive dieting in camp. Another aspect to consider is that of fighting at a more natural weight class, but the question then becomes, how do you define natural, and are you potentially moving the goalposts and will end up in a similar situation, albeit at a different weight? There are definitely some positive steps that can be taken to mitigate some of the risks associated with developing eating disorders. However, it is a complex area, and you do need to work with a qualified nutrition practitioner to help you through that process. It would be remiss of me to not discuss this topic without sharing where people can get help if they feel that they need it. So if you're in the UK, you can either speak to your GP or get in touch with Beat to get further information and support. If you're in the States, it's best to contact your GP or nationaleatingdisorders.org. There are also various links to other countries' helplines and websites that I will leave in the description of this video, along with all the other links that I've just discussed. Hopefully this video has been useful and has potentially shone a bit of a light on this area that isn't widely discussed in MMA. If you've got any questions at all about anything I've discussed in this video, then please leave them in the comments down below or send me a direct message and I'll get back to you as soon as I can. I'll see you in the next one.